Hello, and welcome to the ITI Insights Live briefing, Unpacking Agentic AI and the Next Era of Tech Leadership. My name is Janae Washington, and I'm Senior Director of Communications at ITI. Following the release of our new paper focused on Agentic AI, ITI policy experts today will dive into what Agentic AI is and policy recommendations and considerations. Before passing the mic over to our moderator, Courtney Lang, let me go over a few housekeeping items for today. This conversation is on the record and will be recorded. Please submit your questions through using the Q&A function throughout the conversation. Let's go ahead and get started. Courtney, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Panelists, if you would also turn on your cameras, that would be fantastic. Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you so much to everybody online who is joining us today for the conversation. We're really excited to talk a little bit more about the next major evolution in artificial intelligence technology, agentic AI. In our new policy guide, which we issued earlier in November, we describe agentic AI systems as systems that are capable of multi-step planning and reasoning and tool use, allowing them to not just generate content, but also take action within boundaries that are set by users. It's a meaningful shift from traditional generative AI and one that we see opening new opportunities across the economy. We're already seeing early benefits from applications in manufacturing to cybersecurity, where agents are able to triage alerts and strengthen defenses across different government and consumer applications. And really, what we're seeing is an ability to streamline and make operations more efficient across the board. At the same time, many of these advances also raise new policy questions around risk, transparency, security, and workforce more generally. And in many instances, we think we don't need to be reinventing the wheel in terms of policy approaches, but that there are strong, flexible, risk-based frameworks in place that can help to mitigate the risks. And so today, we really want to talk about both sides of the equation, both how we promote innovation while also managing potentially new or exacerbated risks that the technology might present. And I'm really excited to be joined by three folks from across ITI membership, from Siemens, Cisco, and Anthropic, to share a little bit more about their perspectives on agentic AI. So we're going to kick it off just with a super brief round of introductions. I would ask each of you to just give us maybe a 1-minute intro and spiel about how your company is thinking about agentic AI applications and kind of what you're looking at, and then we'll dive into the conversation in a bit more depth. Gerald, why don't we start with you, and then I'll move on from there.
Okay, thanks for having me here today, this morning. My name is Gerald Käfer. I'm with Siemens for many, many years, and I'm in the role of a chief key expert to deploy and apply technology in a customer-centric way. Siemens, as you know, is a company which connects the physical and the physical world with the virtual world and automates automation. And in that sense, Agentic AI is a key technology, a key enabler to do that. And we have several of those in our portfolio, co-pilots for engineering. So our portfolio is digital enterprise, digital manufacturing. And for there, in that sense, we apply the technology across the life cycle of the product design, creation, manufacturing, and then servicing the manufacturing lines. And for that, we have co-pilots for engineering, manufacturing, and services in this.
Great, thank you. Tiffany, maybe over to you next.
Hello, everyone. Courtney, Janae, thank you for having me. I'm Tiffany. I'm an engineering product manager and an AI security researcher at Cisco AI Defense. The way we tackle agentic AI is we look at it through two lenses. We look at the threats to agents, so analyzing the threat landscape and understanding how bad actors are developing either new attack vectors or reusing TTPs that we already know to leverage and the vulnerabilities within AI agents. And then obviously, how can these agents amplify human capabilities and defenders in their work on strengthening cyber resilience and robustness. It's great to meet you all.
And last but not least, Gabe, I'll turn it to you.
Hi, I'm Gabe Nicholas. I lead Agentic policy on the product public policy team at Anthropic. In case you don't know Anthropic, we are a public benefit company and we build the model Claude, which is the best model for coding and agents in the world. We build our own agents like Claude Code and our browser extension, but we also have our model that we allow a lot of businesses to use to build their own agents. So very excited to talk about this topic today.
Wonderful. Well, glad to have you all here. Gabe, I might start with you by asking maybe what sounds like a basic question, but I think it's helpful to kind of setting the scene here. And at the outset, I kind of gave an overview of the definition that we use in ITI's Agentic AI paper around how we think about what an agentic AI system is. But I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how you see agentic AI differing from the more traditional generative AI systems and kind of what the biggest distinguishing factor is there.
Totally. So I think in 2023 and 2024, we saw a lot of AI as information system, right? That's where you would see people online talking about, tell me how to change a tire in the style of a Shakespearean sonnet, right? Strictly being used for information. I think agentic AI is this shift, Courtney, as you mentioned, that AI systems are able to take actions in the real world. And that can mean really simple things like searching the web, or it can be really complicated things like executing code and doing data analysis. At Anthropic, when we talk about agents, we talk about not just taking actions, but sort of what enables them to take actions. So we talk about an agent as first a system that plans what actions it's going to take, and then executes those actions, and then sees how it did on those actions and iterates accordingly. So an agent might, someone might use an agent to create a chart to like analyze sales opportunities in a specific industry. And the agent would first say, okay, here's the data sources I'm going to look at. Then it would execute the tools to actually pull information from those data sources. And then it would look at that information and say, is this right? Did I try to chart it? Did it make an error, et cetera? So that's the sort of feedback loop that we see agents having.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, that's a helpful distinguisher. I think, just trying to set the stage for how this technology is a little bit different than perhaps what we've seen before, though, of course, it does build upon a lot of the existing tech that's out there. I think a really important point that we raise in the paper that we recently published is kind of on this notion of autonomy, right? And that not all agents operate with the same level of autonomy. And some, simply assist with steps in a process. Some perhaps are more equipped to fully take those steps in the real world. And so, curious for any of the panelists that want to jump in and speak to this. I mean, how do you think about this spectrum of autonomy in the context of the agentic AI applications that you all are integrating, and kind of where does human oversight fit into this? Happy to start with anybody that wants to jump in.
Okay, then I jump in. I think
Okay.
from the application side from Siemens, where we can really apply agents close to physical processes, it's obvious that the spectrum of autonomy is really important, especially the control and putting safeguards in place, because it's a different thing if you create an Excel spreadsheet in the wrong way versus you steer a machine which is safety relevant and then hits a person. So therefore safeguards at every level. And then usually what we do is we use the agent to propose something, but the accountability is still with some humans who then approve it before application in a physical environment, for example.
Gabe, curious about how you guys are thinking about kind of the role of human oversight and at what point humans have to kind of jump in or approve things or otherwise.
Yeah, so I'll just say that this is a problem that gets increasingly challenging as agents are kind of increasingly capable and complex. So if you're imagining an AI system that is able to call a tool, maybe web search, maybe search your email, maybe create a calendar event, it's actually pretty simple to bring human autonomy in there. We have examples like, with your phone, right? If you download a Maps application, that application will ask you for permission before accessing your location, right? Or before being able to access your Bluetooth connections or whatever. with Claude, we use something pretty similar. That's whenever you connect to an external tool, you're able to say, do you allow it to use this tool? Do you deny use of this tool? Do you always allow use of this tool? Where I think things start to get more complicated is when you end up in this multi-agent world where AI systems are calling other AI systems. We have design approaches that we use to deal with this as well. We have this like planning mode where essentially Claude will present a plan for what it's going to do and the user can approve and edit the plan. But I think bringing in human autonomy and agency, it's really a technical design problem, and it's one that is constantly shifting as the technology does.
Yeah, makes good sense. Tiffany, what about you guys?
Yeah, if I may jump in, I think we look at it from agents augmenting human operators, especially in the cybersecurity space, rather than replacing them. So, as Gabe said, having a human in the loop, kind of, or a human in oversight is kind of a technical problem or a technical feature by design that we believe in at Cisco. Now, there's another layer that I would like to address is the kind of the attack surface. So, yes, agents and multi-agent scenarios are unlocking new capabilities, speed, scale, but then obviously as they query different tools, etc., the attack surface augments. So, how to balance between the automation piece and being critical about what are the security risks that we're exposing our organizations to through agents? How do we deal with that? How do we adopt a proactive rather than a reactive approach when it comes to that? So I think these are questions that at least in industry, we're still grappling with, and makes the issue and the innovation even more important to address. So, yeah.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I think it's just important as Gabe noted and others, this is a complicated problem. And I think, given the wide range of applications we're seeing, I think it's important to understand that right level of human in the loop, et cetera, also may vary depending on as Gerald was mentioning, kind of what type of risk you're trying to address and otherwise. And so, something that I think we'll continue to iterate on as the tech progresses. Maybe before we dive into some of the benefits and practical applications a little bit more deeply, I can just ask each of you to reflect on kind of what is the one thing that you're seeing kind of folks misunderstand about agentic AI, or maybe a challenge or sticking point that you would like to explain.
I mean, I can start again here this
Okay.
round. I think what I notice a lot is that people think they can, or that agents will replace humans in the workforce at a one-on-one basis. Because, that will not happen and not anytime soon. And the reason for that is agents internally think different than humans. Humans live in the physical world partly, and they can live in the digital world. But for agents to bridge from the digital world in the physical world is really, really hard today and will take time until they do better. So therefore, if you assume that, you will have a lot of learnings at the early in the early application of agentic AI in the physical space.
Anyone else thoughts on that question?
I could bring kind of a spicy take here, which is
Love it.
I, I think that we don't actually know totally what the paradigm of agents is going to look like yet, right? Is it going to be that these multi-agent systems do really well? Is it going to be the case that agents are navigating your browser and clicking around? Is it going to be going through a chat interface? I think we're at this time where companies up and down the stack are really experimenting with what their agentic workflows look like. And we are going to learn a lot over the next year or two of like what works well and what doesn't work so well. So I do think that we're in this, there's like a lot of potential here, but I think it's also important for us to remember that we are in this phase of experimentation, and what exactly is an agent, or like what their design looks like or what it looks like to interact with an agent, is something that's not set and is going to change a lot in the short term and medium term and long term future.
Yes.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I think very important to keep in mind that we're kind of still in the very early days of this tech. And so, as you note, the paradigm is still unsettled. Tiffany, did you have anything to add to what
Yeah.
Gerald gave raised?
Another hot take, maybe. So, another misunderstanding that I'm seeing is the idea that AI agents can make it easier for cyber attribution. Well, let me unpack that. So, I've heard a lot of people assume that because agents can process huge amounts of data, they can maybe pinpoint who's behind a specific cyber attack. But obviously, as we know in cyber, attribution is fundamentally adversarial. So threat actors would deliberately craft their attacks and plant false flags, reuse each other's tools, use obfuscation to kind of hide behind that. So AI agents can maybe surface the patterns and the correlation faster, but that one level deeper of, untangling intentional deception or providing geopolitical context that's needed for reliable attribution, I think we're not there yet, at least today. So that's one. Another related misconception is kind of the offense defense balance when it comes to AI agents. There's a lot of talk about, what's the delta that AI agents provides for both defenders and bad actors? What's the incentives of using them? We still don't really understand, in a multi-agent scenario that creates a feedback loop, how does that affect our current defenses? If bad actors are using them and relying on them, are we kind of seeing sophistication with the use of AI agents by hackers and APT groups? What does that mean? What does that mean? How do we detect that sophistication, right? And then how do we defend against it if we cannot predict it? So yeah, some food for thought.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. I think, as all of your remarks have indicated, we're still in the early days. I think there are new kind of challenges, as you just noted, Tiffany, that are being introduced, potentially on the adversarial side, but then certainly more broadly in terms of exactly what some of these workflows are going to look like in different verticals, in different enterprise applications across the board. With that in mind, I would love to pivot a little bit and try to talk more about maybe some specific practical applications that we're seeing to try to give the audience a sense of, where we are seeing right now some of that integration and more broadly transformation taking place in some of the different verticals that you all are focused on. Gerald, maybe I'll start with you. I think I read a statistic that said some of your industrial AI agents are already demonstrating up to 50% productivity gains in kind of the manufacturing workflows at Siemens. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about maybe an example of a workflow where you have seen particular improvement or transformation most rapidly, and maybe what the next big leap you expect is over the next 6 to 12 months in terms of some of these industrial agents.
Great question. So let me try to address that and answer parts of it or most of it. So first, I think when it comes to use cases, Siemens, as I mentioned, we focus on connecting the physical world and the virtual world, and we try to automate automation. So that's our mission. And along that, you have the whole life cycle. When you design a product, when you engineer a product, when you design the manufacturing for the product in the factory, which is another design, and then actually manufacture the product at highest quality. So to achieve that, we define something like digital threads. And today, this digital foundation is tool driven. So you have many, many tools for each of that step. And in the first wave, our agents in form of co-pilots are attached to each of those products. And then in the product, they augment and support the engineer to engineer faster. And at that level, you see up productivity gains at these certain steps up to 50%. So especially when you start creating new projects, the first setup phase is tremendous. You achieve tremendous productivity gains via these co-pilots. So today that work is focused more, we see faster adoption in the engineering environment because the risk is less and you can simulate more, you can validate more. The success is always if an agent generates something and then can validate it by itself in the virtual space, then you are faster in the physical space in operation. we need to do a lot of validation with the humans still, because think about 80% of the workforce or of factories in the US are still working with pen and paper. So there is a step to digitalization, which needs to happen first to bring the agents really in game. Next 6 to 12 months, I think the breakthrough, what we will see is today we have that product specific agents, and the next wave will be along this digital thread, the agents taking over more complex tasks, working with the product agents as a multi-agent system and create workflows. So as an example, what I can share is you would take you want to adjust a part for a machine. So you just say what you want to adjust. The agent and the CAD system would create a new CAD design, would hand it over to the simulation agent for structural verification. And then the information comes back. And if everything is good, the human could approve the checking in a PLM lifecycle system ready for production. And that could be an automated workflow in 6 to 12 months.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. That was a comprehensive answer. I think you answered most of the parts of my question. So, yeah, helpful to kind of hear where you see some of the specific productivity gains and progress in the next 6 to 12 months. Tiffany, from your perspective, I know you've talked a little bit about this already, both on the how agents are enhancing cybersecurity side, and then also how agents are potentially bolstering adversaries. But I want to talk a little bit more about the benefits that we're seeing on the cybersecurity side. And so in my opening, I mentioned that we're seeing, agentic AI systems able to help support the triaging of alerts, automate detection in a more pronounced fashion and support SOC teams. So curious if you can speak a little bit more to what you are seeing as the most meaningful advantage of agentic AI in the cybersecurity context right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest advantages is that agents can take over the tasks that are data heavy, repetitive, and also pattern based. So these are kind of the three elements of the North Star that I would look at, and elevate, of course, human skills that are judgment based, contextual, and strategic by nature. So, in other words, we can look at agentic AI systems in cyber as augmenting the capabilities instead of replacing human operators. So, let me give you a few examples of what agents can take off the kind of workers' plate. So, first, obviously, the first level alert triage. So, we've seen agents helping sort alerts by severity level and risk scoring, correlating related events, even applying some known detection rules and machine learning patterns. So, for instance, if you have 1,000 login failures alert overnight, okay, an AI agent can maybe sift through it and quickly determine which are likely user mistakes, which are part of a coordinated attack, and then leave that for human review. Another element would be probably routine data enrichment and investigation steps. So, for incident response, incident investigation, we always have analysts performing standard steps. So, you look up the IP address, you check the domain against threat intel feeds, etc., etc. So, I think since there's a very structured pipeline of steps, some of these can be automated and they can present through agent automation a unified holistic view for the analyst. It saves time and it ensures that no basic steps are missing. But I do want to say that as agents take over some parts of the workflow, I want to emphasize some elements where human capabilities become even more central as the technology and the capabilities advance. So one of them is obviously handling novel threats and critical thinking. So attackers are constantly evolving. The technology is constantly evolving. So when something doesn't fit the known patterns and the rules, we really need human analysts to kind of form the hypotheses about what might be happening, decide when to escalate, when to contain, when to call in additional expertise. That critical thinking is really essential. But there's also a second layer, which is strategic and risk-based decision making, which obviously not all incidents in cyber are equal. So, agents can help automate, but humans remain essential for decisions like how to balance business continuity with aggressive containment, how to communicate risk, and then obviously the last lever, which is policy oversight. It's, we have powerful AI agents, but they need guardrails. How do we make sure that we're building the right policies and frameworks and guidelines that allow for iterative security kind of revisions for AI agents, but also a responsible use of them from a privacy perspectives as well?
Thank you. Yeah, helpful to get a sense of the different types of applications that we're seeing in the cybersecurity space and appreciate some of the more practical examples of where we might see agents, kind of taking some of those more routine tasks off defenders' plates versus areas where it's actually more important than ever that we have kind of human engagement and oversight in certain instances. Gabe, I want to pivot to you. I was doing a little reading in the lead up to our panel today about Claude and the research mode that you guys have. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that in particular, because as I understand it, at least, there's kind of a lead agent in that mode that then allows a user to query Claude, and then it subspawns additional agents that explore in parallel. And then at the end of the day, it kind of synthesizes and presents information back to the user. A, I would like you to tell me if I synthesize that correctly. If not, please correct me. But B, I would love to hear your thoughts on kind of what near-term implications you see this type of feature having for research capabilities for both enterprise and potentially consumer workflows as well, and maybe share a little bit more about what kind of tasks you see becoming possible with this. Also, if there are other applications that you would like to talk about, please feel free. But I found that one particularly interesting.
Courtney, you got it perfectly. And actually, maybe let me just zoom out and say, first of all, Gerald and Tiffany, it's really interesting to hear about the use cases that you all are talking about. When we are talking about agents and sub-agents, I kind of want to distinguish what we're talking about here. These examples that Gerald and Tiffany gave about like thinking about how to deploy agents at an organizational level, right? Where one team uses one agent and another team uses another agent, and you have this kind of like emergent system where these agents were maybe designed independently, but are going to be talking to each other. This is, for some people, the present, for some people, the near future. But like this is the larger approach that we see coming for organizations and for innovative companies, and will be a particularly interesting challenge to see how large multifaceted companies like Cisco, like Siemens, like you all are kind of at the forefront of this. So it's really interesting to hear about how you are thinking about AI agents at an organizational level. What Courtney's talking about, and I'm happy to talk about here, is maybe a much more zoomed in, narrow thing, which is when you ask an AI system to do a task, it is able to call AI systems to do smaller versions of that task, right? So if you ask Claude to do something complex, we allow Claude to say, hey, I actually think it's a good idea to break this task down and ask mini Claudes to do it, right? So for instance, if you are doing research on a healthcare insurance policy, Claude might send one sub-agent to gather data on premiums and another to look up regulatory requirements and another to find case studies. There's a couple advantages of this model. One of them is that it is faster, right? You're able to, because you're having multiple Claudes working at once, you just get the answers faster. And the other one is that it can be cheaper since you can have the sort of like smarter agent. So like, for example, as we do it, our largest model, Claude Opus 4.5, will give simpler queries to our smaller, less expensive models like Haiku. And so it can end up saving money. But what we actually found and wrote about in the system card for Opus 4.5 is that this is also this sort of like you have one big Claude as the orchestrator and it sends mini Claudes off to do certain tasks. It can actually lead to measurable improvements in performance of those tasks. So we did a test here where we gave Opus 4.5 the ability to deploy some of these sub-agents, and we found that it had a 12% improvement on research tasks. This is something that is available in our research mode, as Courtney mentioned, but like in general, I think we see this as a future paradigm that is going to be repeated and is going to be really useful.
I just want to confirm that. So especially when the closer you get to the application, And the more, especially in the industrial space, manufacturing, where you need high precision, you will create the specific agent even using smaller models, and likely also have to run them pretty closely to the physical process. I always compare that, for those who know this nice Waymo cars for autonomous driving. So you need the big AI factories where you train the models, but then you need to inference the models. And part of those need to be inferenced pretty close to the process to get the reaction time. So this is where we work very close with our partners here, as well with Anthropic, and to find the right ways to apply the technology.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate both kind of zooming out and then zooming in on a very particular sort of application and how your different companies are deploying in those sectors. I want to shift, and we've talked a little bit about this throughout the conversation. I think it's just something that's really central, and at least in conversations that we've been having, comes up quite a lot, and that is specific to workforce. And so, Tiffany, I know you already mentioned some of the areas that agentic AI is kind of taking more of the routine tasks off of workers' plates, but I do want to explore that in a little bit more depth. But Gabe, maybe I'll start with you, and I was just wondering if you could talk to kind of this idea that agents are going to shift labor and skill demand potentially. But at the same time, we are seeing certain benefits coming from it. I mean, again, how should we think about this? What specifically should policymakers be thinking about, or should they be understanding with regard to the difference between kind of task automation and job displacement more broadly in the context of agents? I think, this is a nuanced subject, and so I want to dive a little bit more deeply into kind of what the differences are between kind of routine automation, displacement, and things of that nature.
Yeah. So when we talk about AI and labor, we often talk about this idea of automation versus augmentation. Automation is when you use an AI system essentially to do your job for you. And augmentation is when you're able to use your AI system to be able to do your job better. And this is something that we actually try to measure how our users are using in this economic index that we put out pretty regularly. Which is also focused on like what are the economic impacts of Claude and AI writ large. When we published our first economic index in February of this year, we found that like a little bit more than half of the requests that people were making to Claude were to augment their work, and a little bit less than half were to automate their work. And in September 2025, when we ran this again, we found that this had swapped, that it had gone from a little bit more half to automation and a little bit less than half to augmentation. I think this is like an important and notable trend to not stick our heads in the sands about. I think on the augmentation side, this points really to the possibility of very meaningful US labor productivity growth. We had a blog post last month that was talking where at Anthropic, we use Claude to do a lot of things. And so we used Claude to estimate how long Claude had saved users on different tasks. So it's a bit of a back of the envelope study, but it was like, how long do you think this task would have taken? How long did it take you? And it was something that we found where that could represent a 1.8% increase in US labor productivity growth annually. That is really meaningful. Again, like it's very easy to question the methodology of the study, but like it does show that like there is something that is happening, and like we are looking at very serious productivity gains. On the automation side, it is clear that AI is going to have an impact on jobs and how jobs look in the jobs market. But what and where and what we should do about it, I think hasn't emerged yet. The trend line isn't enough to act yet. And I think the main thing that policymakers should be thinking about is how do we get better data from the labs, from labor statistics. There's a lot of places where we need better information about what is happening to design our policy interventions. And I think that's where policymakers should be looking right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a primary point that we make in the paper, right? Is this need to have additional information and evidence about kind of where we are seeing shifts or not, so that as we are thinking through, how can we best shape policy in a way that is productive and helpful and make sure that workers are appropriately prepared, we have that information and data to back up that decision making. And so I think we are in a place right now where agentic AI is still so new that we don't have a full grasp of the long-term effects. And I think it's important to go into, these conversations with a clear-eyed understanding of that. That doesn't mean that we won't understand, longer term, but because we are still in the early phases, I think that's relevant to highlight. Tiffany, I saw you come off mute. Did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback of what Gabriel said on the policy point. Going back to kind of the beginning of the discussion, since agents are both a critical asset for organizations, but also a potential target, there must be some sort of a framework or guideline that both public sector and private sector agree on. And what I mean here is a problem of language. So I've been in a lot of rooms where we have the technical expertise from leading frontier labs, and we have, government representative and policymakers who do not speak the same language because A, they view the threat landscape differently, B, they define the threats differently, and C, they have different incentives. So this is obviously a real problem that's not just attached to agentic AI per se, but is obviously like attached to any critical assets, whether we're talking about, AI models, critical infrastructure. It is a broad problem. So how do we create a common lexicon? And how do we build public-private partnerships that are solid enough and that are beneficial enough on both ends? And at the same time, that allow us to build agents that are secure by design, which is obviously a trend right now in academia and in industry. We're talking about this as well. And how do we do that at scale without compromising on the huge benefits that we're accruing from agents? So that's definitely another thing to put in mind for policymakers.
Yeah, thanks. Gerald, I don't know if you had kind of perspectives on that broader question or maybe more specific thoughts about specific tasks, for example, that agents are taking off of workers' plates, perhaps that are more routine, areas where it is allowing them to be a little bit more creative. Would be interested from the Siemens perspective. I know you mentioned some of the kind of engineering gains that have been made as of late, but if there's anything more specific that might be helpful to talk about. I would also be interested to know if you're seeing kind of particular areas where reskilling or additional training or upskilling might be helpful to really making sure that the workforce can thrive alongside agentic AI.
Absolutely. And this is an excellent question again. So when we look at that at use cases in the manufacturing space, especially in the US market, there is a huge gap on of labor and skills. So the hope is that AI and agentic AI really helps to close that gap by augmentation and automation. So therefore, first, we are not yet replacing, but when let's say that the system grows and we want to get the application of AI gets more and more, we will get a lot of productivity gains through that agents. The jobs, I think, so everything that is at the shop floor, where you live between the physical and the digital world, that is still something where the humans will shine and outperform in the next couple of years until let's maybe humanoid robots come in and then take over, but that is a little bit further out. Tasks which may be first affected or jobs are in that IT space, which is attached to shop floors or manufacturing, which creates basic stuff, generic reports, task list, work description, documentation. So that's, some could call that boring work anyway. So let's put the agent on those works. But here, all the agents will shine and create a lot of productivity quickly. And we do that already. We see that already in first applications.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Anyone have thoughts about any areas? I mean, as we've mentioned, I think we're still in the early days, but kind of thoughts about where particular skill sets might need to
Oh,
evolve
yeah.
or what sorts of skill sets might need to be kind of woven into existing training programs, et cetera, to make sure that workers are prepared to leverage this technology?
Yeah, I missed the skill sets. Just to add that, I think the important part is to understand how to train systems. So once you bring in the agent as a core technology, they need to be trained to that application domain. So, and that requires working with tools, digital tools, and therefore we need a skilled workforce understanding the tools and helping the agent to do their work, and then supervising the agent. So understanding the process environment, that is something which will require upskilling in the next years.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know, Gabe or Tiffany, if you had any additional thoughts on that.
I will just say in my own personal use, which is like constantly trying to automate my own job, um, I end up falling back on writing skills and experience. Just
Yeah.
that core skill of like, what is the exact thing that you want to say just becomes so important when you are trying to be able to get an AI system to do something. That is kind of the core skill of writing. And it's very funny to watch the very soft skill of writing and the very hard skill of engineering kind of merge into one. That's not a workforce upskilling approach, but in my personal life, I
Yeah.
am I am flexing my writing muscles all the time.
Fair enough. Tiffany, I don't know if you have anything to add. Otherwise, we can move along.
No, I definitely agree with the writing muscle. It's something that never ends. I think another one is having people as bridges. Like going back to my initial point, we need people who are in the middle, who can understand code, understand the technical problems or the technical kind of architecture of AI models, etc., and also can speak to kind of the governance and the policy leads to try to kind of bridge that gap. I do think it is a critical gap, and if we cannot find a way to fill it through upskilling or through creating this middleman or this middle ground, then it will be difficult to create governance or frameworks that are suitable enough for innovation and for the risks to and from the technology.
Thanks. Yeah. So, I mean, oh, go ahead, Gerald.
I absolutely agree. This middleman, as Tiffany called it, create that new job type which understands still the process, is well educated, can express what needs to be done for the models and help train and then supervise and correct. That is something we don't have today, and we need to skill up quickly.
That's helpful. Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I mean, with that in mind, we've talked a little bit about some of the policy implications throughout the conversation, but I do want to spend a little bit more time diving into those implications in a little bit more depth. Certainly, the paper that we've been talking about throughout the webinar today is focused both on kind of unpacking the technology, what it is, what key parts of the technology are important to understand. But then we also have a section that's focused on some of the emerging policy implications, some of the things that we think are very important for governments around the world to be thinking about as they're thinking about how to harness this latest evolution of the technology. And so, Tiffany, maybe I'll start with you. I think we've talked quite a lot about kind of agentic AI in the cyber context, the new attack surfaces it might introduce. And there is a specific section in our paper that focuses on how do you ensure that AI and agentic AI systems are built, with security in mind. So wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about kind of what some of the frameworks or best practices, guidelines you all are seeing as being particularly important in the agentic AI context, because again, this is an evolution of the technology, and a lot of times I think, cybersecurity doesn't necessarily have a radically new approach, but there are some things that may need to be kind of looked at in a little bit of a different manner. So, wondering if you can talk a little bit more about kind of what frameworks you would suggest policymakers prioritize, encouraging the adoption of, or otherwise.
Yeah, 100%. I think agentic AI, the security baseline or security risks is not a silo. We have the bits and pieces that are already out there. It's about combining them from a framework perspective. So I can speak from a Cisco perspective as well. We definitely look at, the agentic frameworks coming out of OWASP, MITRE, Atlas, even the NIST AI RMF. Obviously, these are not comprehensive and enough. And I mean, it's normal because the threat landscape is evolving, and we will need to have one framework, one taxonomy that encompasses agentic, MCP, supply chain risks, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these bundled into one, mapping onto global regulation, but also the guidelines that we already have for basic cybersecurity and for AI models and AI security in general. Something that we also emphasize is obviously evaluation. Cannot stress that enough is, how are we thinking about benchmarks and evaluation with agentic AI? We obviously have ways we're doing it with Gen AI models, etc. But how do we update that? How do we account for, agents' new capabilities? How do we test for security risks? So having that proactive kind of putting the bad actors hat and kind of doing that testing is really, really important, accompanying the frameworks as well.
Great, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I would love to ask Gabe, how are you guys thinking about some of the testing and evaluation capability metrics for agents versus, perhaps some of the more traditional LLMs? Is it different? Is it the same? I mean, what kind of research are you all doing into that space?
Yeah, so we have a number. This is something that we are actually starting to build new evaluations for. We have one evaluation that we built where we gave Claude access to maybe hundreds of tools or something, and like
Mhm.
saw how it was able to do on different tasks. We look a lot at Swebench, which is like an agentic AI thing for doing software engineering tasks. There was, I will say, building agentic AI evals is somewhat of a different process,
Yeah.
because you don't really end up in this like yes no state like you do with some of our safety work. But it is a very active area of development for us. And yeah, it's something that we're working very hard on. And it's actually something that is interestingly like many of our old evals are starting to break in really interesting ways. Right. So we have this evaluation that is based on like how well can Claude buy airline tickets for a user, right? There's a number of these like airline task scenarios. And there was one case that we had where it was supposed to fail, right? Like here was some situation where you're not supposed to be able to buy tickets for some user because of certain rules about the airline. Claude was able to find something where it said, oh, it changed the ticket from one airline to another airline to another airline, and then it was able to perform the task, right? The benchmark wasn't even designed. It said that this was supposed to be a failure. Instead, Claude found like a way to very sneakily pass it, right? So just this agentic paradigm is making us rethink how we have to do our evaluations and how we grade like what is a correct answer versus what is an incorrect answer in really interesting ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for exploring that a little bit more with
Yeah.
me. Gerald, I wanted to ask you, so I mean, we've talked quite a lot about some of the, efficiencies and productivity gains that we're seeing with agent systems, but, wanted to see if you had any specific suggestions around how governments can best kind of promote adoption as they are thinking about the potential kind of economic benefits and transformative applications of this technology. Is there anything in particular that you would suggest they think about or kind of seek to enshrine in policy as they're considering how to really seize on the benefits of this technology?
Absolutely. So when we look at that, and I look at that new trend approaching our economy here and our industry, it's always important to look at this at the technology stack, the processes, and the people involved in the stack. So when policymaker create policies and in more or less define investment areas, especially when we look at the technology stack, and you want to bring that to the physical world, to manufacturing, also consider investing in digitalization on the converting, so the transformation or the linking of the physical world to the digital world. Because if that's not there, agents can only live in a digital world. So for flight booking, for example, that would work. For our engineering, therefore, we are already super successful in engineering and see that where you can create simulations of the real world and then give a space, a safe space to the agent to try out and verify. That increases productivity. Once you want to bridge those to the physical world, we need the digitalization layer there. So investment should also go on that side. That's important. And then open standards, because there will be agents of many vendors and they need to be competitive. They need to be they need to collaborate and need to be compatible, and that exchange needs to be tested, and test benches need to be there, like we did in other standards for TCP/IP for the internet, for example. This agent-to-agent communication is on the way. On the process side, I think we need to be careful that we, because of the complexity, not to focus, not try to create one policy which fits all sectors. We should rather look in different sectors and try to take a risk-based approach, and then make sure we addressed it already, what we call responsible AI, or we call it industrial grade AI, where there is some, if reasoning happens, the reasoning is locked down and tracked so that a human can understand still, or another agent verify what the agent did, not only creating black boxes. And on the people side, we need to upskill and invest in training that people create the new models, new foundational models, and then the application of the models, which is mainly the skill, what we discussed throughout the panel discussion, which is at the boundary of the digitalization, so that the agent more or less can get trained on physical environments, for example.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That was a pretty comprehensive answer. And there are a lot of different facets, I think, that are important to really promoting adoption across the board. It's not just about investment. It's not just about making sure you have infrastructure in place. It's not just about ensuring workforce readiness. It's really a holistic endeavor that needs to be taken across the board. I did want to flag that we're close to coming up on time. So if folks on the line have any questions for our panelists, you can feel free to ask them using the Q&A function in the webinar. I will give you a minute to think about that if you do have any questions. In the meantime, I wanted to pull on a thread that Gerald raised and maybe ask you, Gabe, because I know you've been looking at this as well a little bit more about kind of the open industry-led standards work, and in particular, those standards to allow agents to communicate with each other. I think we're seeing a number of different types of standards emerging, and wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about both what policymakers should understand about those standards and why they're particularly important in kind of supporting reliable communication and coordination of these different agent systems across the board.
Totally. And so I think maybe even just taking this from a policymaking perspective, I think having open agentic standards is something that is really, really important for the continued development of agentic AI and US continued leadership in this area. At Anthropic, we developed this standard, which Tiffany mentioned briefly, called Model Context Protocol. And essentially, this is an open standard that lets any AI system be able to talk to any tool, right? So your email can have an MCP server, your calendar can have an MCP server, Salesforce can have an MCP server. Whatever system you're using can have a MCP server, and that means you can talk to that tool through whatever AI system you're using, whether it's Claude, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Gemini. This is something that, like, in general, the frontier model labs have all been pretty excited about open standards. It's in the ITI report. It's something MCP in particular has been adopted by a bunch of folks. So is Google's A2A, which is sort of a different version of this. But I do think that making sure that all AI systems are able to access the same tools is one of these things that will make sure that the US is able to continue to lead in agentic AI, because you don't need to choose which AI system you use just because it has your tool attached to it. And I think it's also important for businesses that are building using AI as well, right? People want to be able to make sure that whatever tool they're using is going to be able to work with whatever AI system they end up using, and the ability to change AI systems if one works better. All of these things are really good for promoting competition and just promoting the increased adoption of these tools.
Excellent, Gabriel, that you mentioned the MCP, because that was really a great step what you did there, and we use it heavily. We already integrated it to some SCADA systems, and I think just around that, when we try to convey that to our real world, like let's say there are so many tools out, we are a tool vendor, and then we add MCP. That's like there's Home Depot, and you go there and buy a chainsaw. You should also be able to certify it more or less to work with the chainsaw. So there will be some work around training certification, which agent is allowed to use which tool, and that requires some policy support, I would say, or regulation, that we have that quality and safety in the ecosystem, as well as accountability, because Anthropic creates these great foundational models which we use in our agents, and then our agents work or are used by our customers or partners and then customers. And the accountability chain there from a legal and liability perspective is something which needs to be sorted out in the next couple of years.
Yes, totally fair. And maybe that brings us to just a final question, since we only have 3 minutes left, but wanted to see if you guys had, one thing that you would suggest policymakers focus on in the coming year to support both the safe and trusted adoption of agentic AI. What would it be? I know that's a really big question, but maybe just some food for thought to leave folks with before we close out today. Happy to start with anybody.
Be curious. So we need to experiment with it and really embrace agentic AI and apply it where it first works, and can be applied in a risk-based manner.
Yeah. I would emphasize on operationalization. You can have amazing agentic tools with amazing capabilities. If organizations don't know how to leverage them, where it's efficient and where it gives them a delta and an advantage, then we're not doing anything. So it's not only about security, it's about how do we leverage these tools to the maximum. And, I think we always look at government as the regulator, the entity that has to kind of be responsible of security and safety and making sure the guidelines are there. But it can also be responsible in championing companies and small businesses and organizations to kind of guide them on how to implement this and weave it into their operational frameworks and their processes as well. Because then we want to pull the full advantage of that. And as Gabe said, it's not only about building the best agents, it's about using them to the full advantage so that we can stay kind of in the leading board.
Yeah, as building off of what Tiffany and Gerald said, I would say to policymakers, try automating just one part of your job, just one specific aspect. It'll really teach you a lot about like how to use these tools, and it makes you so much more equipped to be able to like have these conversations. It makes like everyone can play that translation role that we've all been talking about that is so important. And like the best way to be able to play that translation role or be a recipient of that translation role is really to have hands-on experience with this technology.
Well, I think that is a wonderful note to close on. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, for talking a little bit about the benefits of the technology, exploring some of the practical applications, and then talking a little bit about, what things we don't know, where are areas that we need to keep exploring. Just really appreciate you all taking the time. Thanks to our audience for joining us. As always, this will be available for you to rewatch if you would like, or otherwise dive a little bit more deeply into our paper, which is on our website at itic.org. So once again, thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate the time, and we'll look forward to talking with you all again soon about a different or same AI policy related question. So thanks again.
Thanks so much, Courtney.
Thank you.